Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Really happy to have you here today and happy to have you here this week for that matter, because we'll be off next week. So you'll have to look to the calendar or look to your email if you're on our list. If you're not on the list, please get on it for future sessions. But next week, our producer, Jack Frost, and I will be at Podcast Movement. If you're a fellow podcaster, please do look for us there. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you in the weeks ahead from jolly old England. So more on that, again, when you sign up for notes on our list. But today, we have a really great program for you with two guests I'm going to be introducing to you in a moment. I know you're looking forward to this session because it's one that is at the core of everything we do, especially in fundraising, with the relationships we build and sustain in order to fund our work. But before I go there, I want to encourage you to do what we usually do, which is to ask you to just say hello, if you would, over in the chat. The chat is a perfect place for you to play throughout today, but it's especially helpful to our guests to know that you're here. And if you could help us by warming up that space and just saying hello, maybe which part of the country you're from or the world you're from, maybe which organization you're with, what you do, feel free to say whatever you want, but just let them know that you're here and maybe contextualize a bit about you and why you're here today. So I really appreciate you, Victoria, Angela, Jennifer, Jason, Zoe, Elise, Jessica, Aaron. If I try to read everybody's name, I'm not going to have time for the presentation, but I do see you here. And we really, really appreciate it, especially since we can't see your faces or hear your voices. This is one of the two places where we can really help to involve you in the conversation, and we want you to be a part of it. So please, Stockholm, Sweden, yes, nice to see you back. I think you win today for distance. But anyway, love to see all of you here, and you can utilize the chat throughout, and you can also use the Q&A as the place to ask questions. Jack and I will be monitoring that throughout as well as our two guests will be. And I'm going to welcome them up to the stage today. That is Barbara O'Reilly, a friend who's been at the series multiple times. I will not read her whole bio to you, but I will tell you that she is, of course, founder and principal, as you saw a moment ago, at Windmill Hill Consulting. You definitely want to check out her work. She is many places doing many wonderful things. Barbara, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, delighted to be back, Jay. Thank you for having us.
It's really great to have you. And I have you to thank also for bringing in our new friend, Nick Kristock. Nicholas Kristock is founder and executive director at Fleece and Thank You, and founder, CEO, and board member at Can Catch. And so this is going to be a great session today because we're dealing with stewardship. The title, in case you need to be reminded, is Rethinking Stewardship to Create Better Donor Experiences, or Why the Current Model is Broken and How to Fix It. And so I'm going to step out of their way and let them share with you, but please utilize the Q&A and the chat throughout so that they can see what you're seeing and thinking, and then we can weave your questions into the conversation in a bit.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone. So question for you. What does a New York City hot dog have to do with fundraising and stewardship?
And my question for you is, how does a conversation sparked by a bag of potato chips turn into major recurring donor?
So as Jay mentioned, I'm Barbara O'Reilly. I am just delighted to be here, founder and principal of Windmill Hill Consulting. I am a career fundraiser. I've been in this space for 30 years. And I know that donor relationships and sustaining donor relationships is core to the work we do. And I'm delighted to be co-partnering with Nick today on this important topic.
And I'm Nick Kristock. You can call me Nick, Nicholas, the blanket guy, you. I'll probably respond to all of them. I'm a Detroit, Michigan native. Lived overseas playing soccer for a couple of years in Australia. Made my way back to Michigan. Been in philanthropy for about 12 years now. Love every second of it, and especially love talking about the donor journey. And what are we talking about today, Barbara?
Oh, we're talking about rethinking stewardship and how we need to change the mindset that we have and change the processes to create better donor experiences, because frankly, the model we have is not working. And how are we going to change that, both our mindset and our processes to raise more money to keep more donors?
And it's definitely our hope that you'll leave this conversation having very practical steps of exactly what to do coming off of listening to this presentation.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is set the context. I'm going to talk about what we're seeing in the philanthropic state in the U.S., what drives donors, and what we know from research works. It works in keeping donors engaged and in keeping donors giving again and again. Nick, you're going to talk about the how.
Yeah, we're going to hope to bring it all together as well. And again, give you very, very practical takeaways. You can even start building your donor journey while we're going to be going through this today. That's our goal.
I sort of talk, I think I'm sort of the opening act for you, Nick, in a
No,
lot of ways. So
no way. It's the 1-2 punch. Get ready, everybody.
this is going to be fun. Okay, so about back to that New York hot dog. For those of you who might know the New York food scene, the restaurant scene, there's a restaurant called 11 Madison Park. And maybe just drop in the chat, how many of you have been watching The Bear? If you have, then a lot of what I'm going to share in this story about the New York City hot dog will probably resonate. Will Guidara was the general manager of 11 Madison Park, which was part of the Danny Meyer restaurant empire. Danny is a really well-respected restaurateur in New York. He has many award-winning restaurants. And 11 Madison Park was one of his restaurants that was doing fine, but it wasn't Michelin starred, it wasn't top rated. It was a solid restaurant. And he had brought Will on to be his general manager in that restaurant. And the charge was, how do they make this, how do they elevate this restaurant so that it's on par with his other award-winning restaurants? And Will tells a story in his book, Unreasonable Hospitality, that he knew what this charge was to try to reshape what 11 Madison Park was. And as he was clearing the lunch service one day, there was a group of 4 women, and they had clearly been tourists. They'd been visiting New York, and they were clearly foodies, because as he was clearing the plates, he overheard them talking about the restaurants that they had been at, the incredible meals, the experiences that they had. And this was the last restaurant that they were going to be at before they were heading to the airport. And as they were kind of reliving their visit in New York, one of them said, we've had all these incredible meals, but we never had a New York hot dog. Will says in his book that it was kind of like a light bulb went off over his head. He very quickly and very discreetly left with plates in hand, ran to the kitchen, ran out the door, around the corner to a food truck, to a hot dog stand, and got a hot dog. He brought it back. He had to convince the executive chef, who was now horrified that a New York City hot dog was in his kitchen, to plate it. And so they did, but they still put their usual panache of ketchup and a little bit of mustard. And Will brought it out. He had him cut it into 4 little pieces. He brought it out to the 4 women, and he said, "We would hate for you to leave New York without a taste of one of our iconic dishes." And he says that in that moment, he could see their expressions change. He could see how they were overwhelmed by that act of generosity. And that set them on this course for this rethinking about the idea of hospitality and how they could reshape the culture and the mindset. And so that set him on that trajectory now to say, how do we break apart what we do and make ourselves exceptional? Because he knew that in order to become competitive with the other restaurants, they had to do something different, because you can see it's a beautiful setting. They had brought on this whole new executive chef and team. Kitchen team. He had service was near perfect in their execution. They had the whole experience was technically top notch. However, there had to be something that was different because all the other restaurants who were top rated had the same qualities. And so this hot dog moment caused him to think, what if we embrace a mindset of unreasonable hospitality? What if we could go from what we do now to a place where we're anticipating what our diners would like. We are trying to create memorable experiences for them. And over the course of 11 years, they went from a 2-star brasserie to #1 in the world because of this mindset of unreasonable hospitality. Because what Will realized was that it was not just about the meal. People could choose to eat anywhere. It was about choosing to come to 11 Madison Park for something more than just food. Now you might say, yeah, okay, this is a nice story, but we're not in the hospitality business, Barbara. I'm not understanding that correlation. But let me take it one step further. Will described hospitality as that sense of diners feeling that they are seen and valued. So this is not just the people who they're serving, but the people who work for them. So everybody on their team was feeling seen and valued. It gave everybody a sense of belonging. It made them feel part of something bigger than themselves, and it made them feel welcome. And if you see this, these are very intentional phrases that sound pretty familiar, don't they? Right? This is what we talk about in our work as fundraisers and connecting donors and stakeholders and clients and beneficiaries and others to the work we do, and staff especially. And what he talked about in his book was that this mindset shift was not easy, and it took clearly 11 years, but it was about making sure that everybody who was involved had a part to play. So now, with that in mind, let me just take a step back and give you that big context, that 30,000-foot view, because we have a glimpse of what stewardship could be for our organizations using that model of unreasonable hospitality. I'm going to call it unreasonable stewardship. But let's take a look and see what's going on in the philanthropic landscape. So Giving USA releases its annual report every year. And over the last 40 years, we've been tracking and seeing that, pretty much giving has continued to increase. You will have seen reports, especially the more recent ones, where either giving was down or flat, depending on if you were accounting for inflation. But the reality is, if you think about where it was in 1983 to where it is now in 2023, it's more than doubled, right? So that's a pretty significant impact. And we are also accounting for the fact that in times of recession or times of economic uncertainty, even the different economic crises, it still more or less continue to increase. So that's the big headline, and we get really starry-eyed and excited about that. Money is up, but under the surface, the number of donors and volunteers continues to decline. We have been seeing this steadily over the last 20 years, that the number of donors has been declining by 20%. The number of donors particularly at risk are those who are under $500, and they are the ones who are more likely to disappear, who the first-time donors for sure are disappearing at an alarming rate. And those who kind of give occasionally, those infrequent donors, are also the ones that we as nonprofit leaders are not able to keep and retain. So dollars up, donors down, that's a dichotomy and a tension that we have to sort of sit with for a minute. We also are seeing, though, that donors are seeking connection. They are seeking other ways to express their generosity. So, we know that donors are giving to not just nonprofits, but they're giving through GoFundMe, they're giving through other mutual aid, because they see the power of helping others. And in a Giving Tuesday report that was released not that long ago, they found that about 57 to 60% of people who were surveyed said that they gave both to individuals, non-registered entities, organizations, and registered charities. So generosity is now taking lots of different shapes, and it's not just to nonprofits. We also know that donors are, we're seeing this craving for relationships and community. GoFundMe, Facebook, peer-to-peer fundraising. These numbers have been continuing to grow, and they're showing that there's a prize and a value placed on connection with each other. So dollars up, donors down, but donors and people are finding different ways to leverage and share their collective generosity. We're also seeing this through giving circles. Giving circles continues to rise. It's expected, the number of giving circles in the US is expected to double in the next 5 years. They're generally women-led, although we're seeing lots of other changes in sort of how they are, how they're composed. And in many ways, this is a really powerful way for everyday donors to feel like they can leverage their giving for even greater impact. But again, it's also creating connective communities with each other. We're also seeing that, on the next slide, please, Nick, that on top of all of this, there's a loneliness epidemic. So I would put out there that that this is probably what's driving people to find different ways for that connection, because in this hyper connected 21st century world where we have lots and lots of friends and networks and followers, and some of which translate into real life relationships and connections and peers, the loneliness is something that is at an alarming rate. So what's the role that philanthropy can play? And more importantly, how do we as nonprofit leaders create that antidote to loneliness and create that outlet for generosity in even more impactful ways than ever before? So we have a problem. There's absolutely no way around this. And despite what we see in the headlines about, the increased and incredible generosity, $500 billion contributed to nonprofits here in the US, we have to fix this problem of low donor retention, declining donors, and the donors are going to find other ways to express their generosity, but we have to ensure that we are finding those connections and leveraging them and building off of them. So Nick, I'm going to pass it to you because I know that you've got we've got I want to, before I pass it to you, I want to talk just quickly then about what drives donors, because we're seeing, I hope you're seeing some of the ways that people are operating, are behaving as donors. Connection, this sort of empathy, this community. What we know from research and from psychology is that human beings they need three things, right? We need a sense of autonomy. We need to be able to feel like we are able to do things and we can choose to do things. We need to be able to feel that sense of competence that we're able to do things. And we need that sense of connectedness. And in the middle of all of those, that's where the generosity comes. So all the things I've just showed you about the different forms of generosity are all coming from these three core human needs that we have. Next slide, please. So one other thing we know from psychology is that we are all, whether we realize it or not, working towards our ideal self. Everything we do is helping us to define who we want to ideally be. So don't we all want to be, unless you're a sociopath, we all want to be generous. We all want to be seen as kind. We all want to be compassionate, activists. So the things that we can do, whether it's volunteering, being involved in something, an act of generosity in some other way, an act of generosity and contributions, in all those ways, helps us to define who we are ideally. And that plus our core human needs of autonomy, competence, and connectedness are what shape donor decisions, and why I think we're seeing all these other expressions of generosity outside of the declining donors to nonprofits. Next slide, please. And what we also know, you're just going to have to bear with me while I get a little bit geeky here, but what we also know from neuroscience is that it literally changes the chemistry in our brains. So this big scan here is your brain, and that little scan there is your brain on philanthropy, because it's changing the reward. Like, the reward centers are firing when when we're thinking about something we're going to be involved in, or a gift that we're making to an organization. Those are the reward centers that are firing when we are doing something we really like, when we're the people we love, when we are feeling good about an action, an activity, or an act that we're doing. It's all the same chemistry that is creating a sense of bonding. So it literally is changing the chemistry in our brain, which then means we want to keep doing it more. Next slide, please. So does stewardship really matter? Where does it fit in, right? We've got the science that tells us that it's rewarding. We have the proof of it. We're seeing from the behavioral side that we have these core needs that we need, that we are always striving to meet and to satisfy. So stewardship really does matter in tapping into all of these things. The research tells us that donors want three things. They want prompt and meaningful gift acknowledgement. And this comes from Penelope Burke's decades of research around donor-centered fundraising. They want to know that it's actually doing something, and they want to know what it did before they're asked for another gift. Now, in Penelope's book, her second edition of donor-centered fundraising, she went back to the organizations that had embraced the principles that she outlined in the first book. And what she found was that, in fact, they raised more money, they kept more donors, they had more upgraded giving. So that worked, right? The acknowledgments, the specificity around where the gift was going, the results, the reporting back loop, had strong results. But what else is the research telling us? From Dr. Adrian Sargent and Dr. Jen Shang released some research a couple of years ago about thank you notes and thank yous generally. And what they found was that, yes, thank you notes are that standard sort of, they acknowledge the gift, they confirm receipt, but they create a good feeling. They can increase giving when done right, when done well, but they also can build that bond. They, again, when well written, they can start to build that bond. They can show appreciation, but also, curiously, the staff then starts to feel the benefit. They start to feel happy and excited, and it can change the team culture. So what if we rethought about, on the next slide, please, Nick, stewardship as making people feel the best about what they have done so that they can be the most motivated to do it again and do something better. So tapping into all those neuroscience and psychology principles around ideal self and what our human needs, stewardship can tap into those and reinforce those wonderful acts of generosity for our donors. So next slide, please. How do we shift from transaction to experience? Nick, I'm going to pass it to you.
Awesome. You got it. I think that was an awesome base and foundation there, Barbara. And now I'm pumped to tag off of that and get right into the how. How should we actually be practically doing this in our organizations today? So the whole point of this is to drive giving and stickiness, right? So on its face, you're trying to take people from these non-donor interactions when you interact with people in your community and bring them to become a first-time donor. And if you're looking at that, you might be saying, well, Nick, isn't that a little bit obvious? Yes, we're going to ramp up here. I promise you, we need to set the base. So if we're going to take people from these non-monetary interactions to some kind of general support, there's going to be different journeys that are going to happen along the way. When someone's in that non-monetary interaction phase, you might be starting them through a non-donor welcome series, and we're going to break that down. When you can finally get that gift, what comes next is so important, and that might be your new donor welcome series. And what I'd really like to do with the time we have left is to help you build your journey map. So Barbara and I have prepared a resource. If you've got your phone and want to scan that QR code, you can follow along on that resource. It'll kind of show you how to set up your notebook as we build out your donor journey here. That QR code is going to be on almost every single slide. So don't worry if you miss it here. You're going to see it a bunch of other times. But at the start, if you've scanned that and you're looking at that template, the first thing that we're going to do to build your donor journey map is we're going to start by listing out the interactions. Really important to list every place or moment that you have these non-monetary interactions with a contact. For me, that's things like newsletter signups, volunteer signups, special event attendees, etc. And so you'll notice on that template, there's some boxes at the top for you to be able to start to list those interactions. This is a really great exercise also to do with your team. And I can almost guarantee that someone on your team is going to say something that you probably missed, because there are so many ways that we interact with people. And as the great Kevin Kramer, who's on this call, said, like the hand raisers, there's so many hand raisers out there that are expressing some kind of interest, and how you onboard them and on-ramp them onto your journey means absolutely everything. So all these interactions are going to feed that non-donor welcome series, right? And when you really build this out, you get to this picture of all these interactions, maybe one or two specific mini journeys off of each one, but they all lead to that master non-donor welcome series. I'm going to show you an example of what this can look like at scale. This is way too small to read, not meant to be read. I just want to show you the path of where this starts heading. When you can really lean into this, you can have all these interactions with these micro journeys coming off of them, but everything funneling into that non-donor welcome series. And I'm a two-prong Lego. Sometimes you're not going to use two-prong Legos when you're building the Lego. Like if you're a two-prong Lego, you're feeling this right now and we're vibing. So if you're like looking at this saying, Nick, this is cool, but like, how do I do that? Like, I need to get to the how. You told me this was going to be the how. Great. Awesome. Well, step 2 is from each interaction, you're now going to create the map, right? You want to identify a series of communications from each interaction and lay that out. If you're following along on the worksheet, you can see there's those boxes on the bottom left and bottom right where you can start to map out what I'm about to take you through right here. Examples of those touch points that you're going to make in these journeys. They could be calls, texts, emails, video, letters, thank you gifts, and so many more. And again, a great team exercise, because I'm sure there's something unique to your organization that's a touch point that you can make along the journey. So when we actually start to build this out, I'm going to show you what I do. Take this with a grain of salt, because what works for me may not work for you. So feel free to throw away, repurpose, or reuse anything that I'm sharing. But I start with a series of emails. They've got 5 to 7 day delays. First one's a welcome email or something about us. So again, we've had that non-monetary interaction. They've come from some way. And within the week, they're getting that welcome email that's giving them some general knowledge about what the organization does. I like to oscillate between 5, 6, and 7 day delays. You just never know if you're going to get stuck in someone's every Thursday. You're hitting them with an email, and Thursday's their busiest day. So you'll notice throughout here, I trigger the delays and stagger them. But email 1 is that welcome example. Email 2 is an immediate success story. I make sure that there's video in that email. I make sure that there's something multimedia they can look at and consume and really dig deeper into the organization. And then email 3, they're primed, and I show them the multiple ways that they can get involved with my organization from there. And so where is this taking them? Well, it's all leading them to some potential ask, right? It's that on-ramp to some potential ask. Because again, we said in the very beginning of this how piece, you're trying to take them from that non-monetary interaction to some kind of gift. So then you have to figure out, where do you want to insert the ask? Where do you want to strategically put that ask? And this is a huge deal. Where you put this makes a ton of difference. And I would encourage you to experiment and change where you put this ask and see if you drive different results. For me, after the first 3 emails, my email 4 is an ask. And when you start to stack up the timeline of this, we're 2 to 4 weeks from them having that first interaction with me. I've made some efforts here to educate them on what we do, how we do it, and why. And then I feel like at that point, we've earned that ask. So I ask at the 4th touch point, but honestly, you do you, wherever it makes sense. After this ask, of course, if they give, they're going to exit this flow, and we'll talk about where they go in a second. But after that, I then give them another success story. I show them some more impact, again, using video when I can. And then email 6 is kind of the conclusion of my non-donor welcome series. 6 awesome touch points, 1 ask layered in there. And in this email 6, I make sure that I'm very clear how they're going to be hearing from us moving forward. I even tell them, like, you've finished our welcome series. Like, congratulations, we celebrate it. Here's what you can expect from us moving forward. So if you're listening to all that and saying, but you didn't get a gift, what was the point of that? Now what? What do you do next? Well, obviously, for somebody who makes it through that non-donor welcome series and doesn't give off of it, which for sure, there's a large amount of people that don't, they obviously get the newsletters, how often I send them, the fundraising campaigns that we're doing, invites to our special events, right? They're part of your general ecosystem as you hit larger chunks of your audience. But if you're also sitting here saying, well, yay, they donated. Now what? This is where it gets really fun for me, because this is where you take someone from that general support and try to make them into some kind of ongoing sustaining giver, whatever vocab term you use. And this is where that new donor welcome series comes into play. And this is one that I get really excited about, because I really believe that we've got a moment of opportunity to create this 6-star experience when somebody gives to us for the first time. And there are so many instances where you give a gift and you really don't hear much back. And I think we've got this amazing moment of opportunity to break the script. So for me, I kick it off with a simple thank you email. There, also keep in mind getting that automated donation receipt. So automated donation receipt comes in, Kevin gives his gift today, he gets that automatic email right away. And then the next morning, I send the simple thank you. Now, with the dawn of mass email, we feel this pressure that every email needs to be super stylized, creative, tons of graphics, good colors everywhere. And I try to break the script here. So I send this email and it goes out the very next morning. That is almost as if I sent it one-to-one. And some people receive this and I get a lot of responses back to this email, even though I'm using the tech that we have to automate this one the next day. And we can definitely talk in the Q&A. Please bring your questions about automations versus manual pieces to all of this. But I send this simple thank you email because this one breaks the script. It really looks like I sat down and typed this out directly to Kevin when he gave that gift. Now he's going to get that simple thank you, the donation receipt, and then 2 days later, we send what we call our donor promise email. Now in that donor promise email, we are telling Kevin exactly what we promised to do with that gift. Barbara talked about saying what you're going to be doing with those funds. And we make a promise and we say it out in very clear language. Like, we promise you, Kevin, that we are going to work and show up every single day to turn that gift into insert impact. I also then put those first-time givers 2 days later onto my weekly call list. And every single week, every single donor that comes through Fleece and Thank You gets a phone call. Say it one more time. Every single week, every single donor that comes through Fleece and Thank You gets a phone call. And you would be right to say, wait, so you call every single donor? Well, what if I told you that, yes, we actually do that? Then you would probably be fair to say back to me, no way. How do you do that? And this is where a really awesome tool that I want to share with you is called the Donor SWAT outreach team. I absolutely could not keep this up by myself. So I built out my own Donor SWAT outreach team. This is a team of 2 to 12 individuals, and it's composed of staff, board members, and super engaged, very key volunteers in some instances. And every Thursday, I'm pulling a report that has some very specific headers on it, and it's always the same. And I'm giving that report to that Donor SWAT outreach team. Now, if you're looking at this saying, this sounds cool, I'd love to see that template. Awesome. There's another QR code for you there. You can absolutely make a copy of that template and repurpose it for your own uses. But this template has things like their name, email, mobile number, their life to date giving, any notes that we have about that person, other campaigns they've given to. And then I add 2 columns on the left, owner and owner notes. And at this point, I've talked to everyone on my Donor SWAT outreach team, and I know exactly how many calls they would like to make every single week. For some people, it's 1. For other people, it's 7. Others say, give me whatever you need. I'm happy to make as many as you want. And I bring all that together between the 2 to 12 people. And every Thursday, this report goes out to my Donor SWAT outreach team. and everyone's getting a phone call within the next 24 to 48 hours on their Thursday or on their Friday. It's a committed group that's committed to doing this, and they crush it. They come back in here and they add in owner notes if they got a voicemail, etc. They talk to somebody. This is good for so many reasons. Obviously, the donor feels awesome that they've gotten that phone call. Would I like it to be 24 hours later every time? Absolutely. But for me and the small team we have, this is where we sit at. It's within 7 days. So if you gave on a Wednesday, you're probably getting it the next day. If you gave on a Friday, you're going to get it the next Thursday, and so on. And this is really also really special for the people that are on this donor SWAT outreach team. You talk about disengaged board members. This would be one of the easiest ways to take a disengaged board member and make them very, very engaged. And I would highly recommend, if you've got some of those board members, I just cannot figure out how to get this person moving. Ask them if they would make one call a week and see what that does. My board members start messaging me regularly, Nick, thank you for letting me do this. And that's when you know you've built a win, right? When someone's thanking you and you're like, no, I should be thanking you. No, I'm going to thank you. It's a really beautiful thing. So we've got that email 1, email 2. Then I send a welcome video. This introduces them to the team. Some of the faces on the team, talks a little bit more about the impact. We then share a specific testimony of someone that their giving has helped us serve. Then we tell them some other ways to get involved, because we've probably talked tons of times about how today's donor likes to give financially, but also give of their time. So we make sure we show them a really easy on-ramp for how to volunteer. Other ways to get involved outside of like giving their time, we've got merchandise, etc. Grateful Human apparel for us. And then email 6 is where I will ask them for a second gift. And if you start to add up the timeline here, you can start to see there's some heavier communication at the front end of this. I cool off a little bit, but I don't wait a whole year to ask them again. I ask them at right around 6 months. And I really feel at that point that we've earned the right to ask that. And if you don't ask, you'll never know. So again, we talk about putting in the ask, really figuring out where it feels right for you, where it makes sense. I do it around 6 months. And so Kevin's gotten a great experience up front for the first month or two, a little bit of a cool off period. If we've got other things happening, he might get them. And then that ask comes 6 months later. And so we're building this system, right? We've taken someone from general support, and maybe we get Kevin to give again, which is awesome because he's gone through that new donor welcome series, and at month 6, maybe he gives again. Now it's the question of how can we make it so that Kevin continues to give, whether it's a formal recurring gift or not. How can we bring him to a sustaining giver? And for some of you that have formal recurring donor programs, can you build a path to take someone there? And the biggest thing that I found is that very, very unlikely that someone becomes a recurring donor on accident. But once I built this on-ramp, we immediately saw an increase in our recurring donors because we took Kevin from first gift to second gift to then asking him, hey, you've given twice so far. We would love to bring you onto our recurring donor program. At that point, he's done it twice. He's like, well, for sure. This is a no-brainer. And you can see how, again, like on today's call, we're only going to talk about the new donor, the non-donor, and the new donor welcome series. But this logic continues to stack and continues to stack. And it plays through your entire system, and it even comes in, after your non-donor and your new donor, as people start to lapse. Well, great, you can sustain them through a series. You can hit them with a lapsed donor win-back series, and we just don't have enough time to talk about all of them, though I wish we could. But you can start to see, and I hope that from all this, you can see that as you start to build these up, and again, do it one by one by one, you can build what eventually is for us years in the making of a donor journey map that absolutely did not start out like this overnight. And you're looking at a map that's pulled off by a team of 2 full-time team members, 7 part-time team members at Fleece and Thank You here in Michigan. And it's a really beautiful thing. But you probably could look at this and say, man, that was a lot. Like, this is a lot. But if Barbara and I can tell you anything, like, we really just believe, just start with one. And if you don't have a non-donor, start there. And if you don't have your first-time donor dialed in, start there. And you can start to build these over and over. And Barbara and I are both here for you if you have questions along the way as you stack these up, because you can't build the 5th without building the first. If you're somebody who has a great memory, you might be saying as well at this point, hey, didn't you say something about a bag of chips? And so I absolutely did. In 2018, Lay's Potato Chips reached out to Fleece and Thank You, asked if we wanted to be on 100 million bags of potato chips. We thought it was a spam email, but I responded. And we went down to Dallas, Texas, and took some photos, and we were on 100 million bags of potato chips. Pretty cool. But because we had this non-donor and new donor welcome series in place, we got a small $5 gift. And I had that phone call, and I took that phone call, and it was a man named Aaron. And he said, yeah, I was reading about you guys on a bag of chips, so I made a gift. And I just got to know Aaron through the phone call, Army veteran, awesome human, shared more about our journey. Next week, he was a recurring giver of $10. He continued to grow that gift. He's a $150 recurring donor a month for us now. I mean, he's given thousands of dollars in the last 6 to 7 years to the organization, all because of a bag of chips, but mostly because we had a process in place that was able to catch Aaron and make sure he didn't slip through the cracks and just be a $10 gift that we never heard from again, but become now someone who's given thousands to the missions because of the way that we've built that journey. Whoa, that was a lot. You done now? Yeah, Barbara and I could keep going, but we have reached the point where we would love to dive into the Q&A, answer some of your questions. And we've got some easy ways that you can connect with us. So there's some QR codes up on the screen. You can also put some things in the chat. And of course, you can always reach out with us. Everything that we're talking about here, working on putting together in a practical guide to donor journeys. And so there's a way to get in touch with that resource, as well as to get in touch with Barbara and I. So with that, we'll probably bring Jay back up and get into some QA, and really excited to do so.
Thank you so much for this, Nick. For Barbara, really great material, and there are a lot of questions already. If you have a question in mind and you haven't had a chance to ask it yet, or you have a comment that you want to make, go ahead and plug it into the Q&A. That'll be really helpful. We'll go ahead and try to mine the chat, but sometimes it's a little more complicated because there was so much in there. I also want to let everybody know, if you haven't seen it yet, you'll see it in a minute in the chat, which is that there is a recording of this session being made. So if you saw that going by fast and you want to make sure you can emulate it and learn from it, you'll find that over at the DonorSearch site. DonorSearch, of course, has been the sponsor of the series going back to 2016. So you'll find hundreds of sessions like this one that are available for you at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. And when you're there, you'll see recorded webcasts. This session will be there. And you'll also be receiving an email with a link to a recording of the session, so you can share that with colleagues who need to get this message along with you, because this is obviously a collaborative process to make sure that you're showing the love to all your donors. So let me step out of the way and let you guys take this. Before you do remove that, I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to grab those QR codes. If you haven't had a chance yet, please do go ahead and grab your phone and take a look at those, because these resources are so valuable. Is there any way that people can get additional information from you? Can we provide a link, for example, in the chat, Nick or Barbara?
Yeah, definitely. I am definitely of the opinion that if you can't make time for humans, who can you make time for? So put my email in the chat. You can absolutely pop an email my way. Happy to talk more on it. It's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Perfect. Barbara, how about you? What's the best way to follow you and to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'll put the links in as well to connect and to stay in touch. So I'll put it in right now.
Great. Okay. And then if you all wouldn't mind, maybe you can close the slides out so people can see you, and we can take some of these questions. So I think you can see them. Do you want to self-curate? Do you need any help with that?
Yes, I think we can. I'll just go from top to bottom, Barbara, and we can knock it back and forth. So I got Leslie's question first here. Many of our gifts come in as checks from individuals and DAFs without phone numbers. How do you turn those types of gifts around so quickly? Do you want to bet first on that one, Barbara, and I can go second?
For sure. So the beauty of the internet is that there's a lot of information out there, and that's the scary part of the internet as well. But so sometimes you can do a quick search to find a phone number. Usually most of the time it's correct. But you can also use services like DonorSearch that can do appends for emails and phone. So if you have a set of data on your donor names and information on your database, you can actually then send it to services like DonorSearch that can do appends, and they'll be able to find what they can. It may not be 100%, but it would be a good number. So I would say do what you can to try to find that yourself. However, it's also worth including in your thank you note, if it's coming in through snail mail, it's worth including a written thank you note back with a, hey, we want to keep in touch with you. Can we add you to our email list, or can we call you occasionally with some updates on the impact your gift is making? And then again, you might use a QR code in the reply. You might include a little postcard or something that they can send back. So, asking for the information that way. With regard to donor advised funds, so usually the letters are pretty clear in how the donor wants to be communicated with. It will say, it may not have the donor information on there, the contact info, if the donor has opted to not share that with the nonprofit. More often than not, my experience is that donors are actually putting their contact info in the letter that goes with the remittance, whether it's a check or some sort of electronic remittance. It's up to you as the receiving organization to use that letter and contact, and even if it is by snail mail, most often it is, to still reach out to those donors in the way that they have requested. If they have not included any contact info, you can still reach out to the DAF administrator. So if it's a community foundation or Fidelity or Schwab or whomever, you can still reach out and say, we received this gift from one of your account holders, and we'd love to keep in touch with them. May we pass information on that you can share with them? Because more often than not, the donors may just not want to get added to a mailing list, or they may just be, want to be private, or they are inundated with so much other stuff that they just know they're never going to get to reading your important information. But let the donor advised administrator be able to tell you that and how they'll communicate, because the fund holders that I've talked to, they all say that they will pass on information to their clients who've got DAFs. And they are often recommending to their clients, you might make a test gift to see how you're thanked. And if you're not thanked well from this DAF grant that you make, don't make a larger gift, because they want to ensure that there's that good stewardship in place. So they'll recommend smaller test gifts. So don't dismiss those $50, $100 DAF gifts that come through, because they might in fact be tests, especially if it's from a new donor. Nick, what would you add?
Yeah, from DAFs and checks and the timing of it, it's a good question, Leslie. You almost have to build a separate on-ramp for them when we're talking about journeys, because the reality is if you don't have a digital way to create a touch point, then it is just different, and that's okay. And so maybe just build an on-ramp in, and when you get the DAF gift or the check with no other info, that certain things are going to happen based on what you can pull off. And maybe your donor SWAT outreach team also has stationery at the ready, and they know they've got stamps at the ready, and you're tying them into instant thank you notes as quick as possible. I think that's an easy win. But I'm definitely of the opinion of trying to push for digital touch point if you can, at least ask if you can get it. And the way that we do that is when we get a DAF gift that, like Barbara said, chooses to be acknowledged by us versus be anonymous, or when we get the check with no mobile number or email, what we send back talks about that we really want to send them a video of the impact that we're making with their gift. And that usually will get someone to give us the email or the mobile number. And hey, if they don't, then they're going to stay on the handwritten list or the direct mail list for forever. And that's okay. But we try really hard to get the digital touch point. And the way we do that is to message that we're going to communicate impact very directly with you. Can we get that email or mobile number?
Yep.
Got an anonymous question. What about the people who are overwhelmed by so many touches? Do you offer a box to check that says, less, please? It's it's the right question to ask. You want to shoot first, Barbara?
Yeah, so I think putting the donor in the driver's seat is really important. And in part of whether you've got it as a pop-up on your online donation page, or you send out a separate survey, either right after the gift or at some point throughout the year, asking your donors and your stakeholders, how would you like us to communicate with you? How often would you like us to communicate with you? When would you like us to solicit you? Or when do you typically make your gifts? It gives you some really important insights into the timing and the channel preferences, because someone may choose to make an online gift, but actually doesn't want to receive any emails. And we assume that the channel of contribution is their preferred communication style. So I think putting those couple little questions in there that is important to, and then can inform the donor journey that they go on and the timing, right? Right, Nick?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I also want to make sure we get Ashley's question as well, because this is a very real thing. So thank you, Ashley. How do you recommend doing this when your ED or maybe team is hesitant to add in more emails? You've got newsletters going out. So this also touches on the many touch points piece. I'm a fan of data. I'm a data nerd. So the question I'd say back to the question, Ashley, is, hey, if your newsletters have super high open rates, very high conversion rates, then don't change a thing. Do your thing. If it's working, don't listen to a word I said today. But if you're looking at your email open rates relative to the time you're putting into creating those emails, if you're looking at the dollars you're raising off of those and you're saying, gosh, these numbers don't make sense. We're putting this much time into this, that this many people see, and we get this much engagement or dollars off of it, then trying that change management piece of saying like, hey, maybe let's experiment and try a different way. And at least on the fleece and thank you side, experiment is probably a word we say every week, because we really encourage experiments to be run of all shapes and sizes. And so I don't know if that's helpful at all, Ashley, but my first response when I read that is to go to the data, see what story that's telling. Numbers are great because they tell a story, they're unbiased, they never lie. And then that's the compelling piece to your team if there needs to be some change that you're pushing for.
Yeah, I would also just add to that. I 100% agree, Nick. And the other thing I would add is, what are the communications, like what's the content and what are your segments? So there are, plenty of times when newsletters might be going out that may or may not actually interest the donors. It's not necessarily reporting back on the collective impact that philanthropy is having in that organization. It might be program updates, activities, events, things that the donor may or may not even open. But going back to Nick's point, and which is why I love in that donor journey, it all touch points around the correlation between the power of that generosity and what's happening and how it's being put to good use. So, which may or may not come into your newsletters. So I would say do a little bit of an audit to look at what's in your communications now. Who is it going to? Your donor communications should probably be very different from all the other stuff that's going out. And you don't want to just kind of do a mass e-blast for information that may not be relevant to that subpopulation of supporters, current and past. And that goes back to the data crunching that Nick was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Jay, do we have time for one more? I know I'm looking at the clock. I want to
absolutely go right ahead.
Okay. Just because it's a sensitive subject, and I appreciate the question, Ashley. Barbara, do you have thoughts on memorial donors and how to cultivate or engage or steward a memorial donor?
Yeah, I would say memorial gifts are so important to honoring the life of someone who is important to the donor. And we have to remember that. And so the language that we use in those communications needs to be reflective of why that donor is making the gift. And it needs to also connect then with the celebration of that life that is now manifested in the generosity of that donor. I would put it back though still in the donor's driver's seat. So, you might do a variation. So to Nick's point about different journeys, you might do a variation of a memorial donor journey that is maybe a lighter touch, because those donors are likely giving, this might not be the cause for them, but they're giving because the person who passed away was connected to your mission. So you have to recognize that. And in terms of like what drives donors, we know it has to be really deeply personal. So that personal relationship is what's going to be front and center your mission, as important as it is, may not be what's going to motivate that donor for continued gift. So making sure you've got that through line to the real reason why they gave, we're honoring that life, and maybe showing the connection of that generosity to something that was important to the person that they lost. I think it's important also to do like an anniversary touch point as well. So, at the 1 year mark, you might say, a year ago, you honored the life of someone special, who was important to us too. And we'd love to just give you a little bit of a retrospective of how your generosity was put into use this year. You can word it much not more nicely than that, but I would say something, don't dismiss the donors because it was a memorial and it may be a first time, and the connection might be a little bit more sensitive, but also don't assume that they're going to become a sustaining donor over time, in the same way, because the mission might not be what aligns. The connection to the person they lost is that thread. I don't know, Nick, what else would you add?
Same exact page. Ashley, we exclude certain types of gifts from our new donor welcome series, and a memorial gift is one of those types on that list. It absolutely gets dealt with a totally different communication style, sense of care, number of touch points, until we are able to ask and get a clear direction from that donor on how they'd like to hear from us.
Can I just also underscore, though, you've got to send a thank you to the gifts that you get in memorial, because I can't tell you how many times I've made gifts to organizations in memoriam, and I don't get a thank you. And that just, when I actually think about it, it gets me really frustrated. And the person in, the family or whomever, is not also notified. Again, not doing it because of that, but it's one more way to kind of create that bond for amongst those who are grieving the loss of someone. So really recognize that that's important.
And they're on my call list. I want to make sure I say that, Ashley. They're on my call list, but I've made sure those donor SWAT outreach people know, if you see something in this memorial column, you make sure that you're being sensitive, talking about this the right way.
Yep. Find out what the connection was, why they made that gift, why this organization, to ask about that person who passed.
Thank you both so much. Really, really wonderful information. I know you didn't have a chance to answer every single question, so we did put your contact information in the chat. You all can, of course, take a look there and grab those quickly before they go. And I hope you'll take a look at both Barbara's work and Nick's work as you think about how you want to make sure you're doing justice to the relationships you have with these donors, even when they come in as very modest donations. They may just be trying to find out how much we care. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, Barbara. Really do appreciate it. And I want to thank all of you for being here. We have had people ask again, including one person who just came in from Guatemala. We do see you. Yes, a recording of this session has been made. You will be receiving an email with a link to it. So please be on the lookout for that. If you don't receive it, look in your spam folder. And if you want to see a copy of this, as well as all the other sessions in our series, the webcasts and webinars and the podcast, just take a look over at DonorSearch.net. Under the resources tab, you'll find everything there, as well as on their YouTube channel. You will find also that we don't have anything coming up next week. We'll be at Podcast Movement, but we have lots coming up in the month ahead, including sessions from England and possibly Europe. So please do be on the lookout for that. Time will be a little bit different because of where we will be casting from. So be on the lookout for our schedule. If you don't have it, look for the QR code in just a second. Make sure you get on our list. We'd love to see you next time. Until then, take care. Thank you again, Barbara. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, everyone.